Snow is not quiet so much as deliberate. It thinks before it falls, tasting each inch of air, weighing the drop, the drift, the way it will lie and melt and freeze again. The heavy flakes that came down over Winterfell that morning had the patience of bookkeepers and the memory of ice. They remembered other winters, other years when children had run laughing through the yard, other years when the great hall had been full of smoke and song, other years when the dead had come walking and the world had held its breath. They nested in the cracks of the tower stones and lined the tops of the gatehouse's iron teeth. They softened the thrust of spearheads stacked by the armory door. They took up residence along the black beams of the stables where the horses huffed and stamped, steaming, and where the stable boys moved at half speed for the cold. Sansa watched the courtyard from the covered walk above the kitchens. Her wool-trimmed gloves folded together at the rail, so that she looked at first glance like a statue set in memory of some long-dead lady. The wind touched her only lightly here, and the warmth from the ovens rose through the slatted floor to carry with it the sweet brown smell of baking bread and the mealy comfort of oats. She watched a scullion slip on the stones and right himself with a clown's wobble, cheeks flushed, spoon in one hand and pan in the other. She watched 3 men of the Manderley levy stamp their boots and slap their arms and speak without moving their mouths much, breath fogging as if their words had weight. She watched because she had taught herself over years of too bright rooms and too loud laughter that there is safety in watching. A raven spoke from the rookery tower, harsh and flat. No bird in the world takes joy in its own voice, she thought. It is only men who mistake noise for gladness. Lady Cautlin, who had been a nurse to her mother and then to her, touched her elbow lightly. "My lady, if you please, the stew." "I'll come," Sansa said, and took in one last frame of the yard. A boy in a hat too large, a line of wet prints, a thin thread of smoke unspooling toward the pale sky. She turned and followed Cautlin down the stair. The kitchen was a kingdom of its own, ruled by heat and hunger. It moved with the slow steadiness of habit. The turning of the spit over the trench, the beating of batter, the low argument of 2 women about how much salt a hare would bear. The cook was a Bennett woman with arms like hams and a voice that could cut meat. She bobbed a half-curtsy to Sansa that was not so low as to make the Lady of Winterfell uncomfortable. Bennett had known Catelyn Stark too well to fawn. "Boiled barley for the men," Bennett said briskly. "And broth for those who do not deserve even that, and for the lords." "The same," Sansa said. Bennett nodded as if she had expected no other answer and no other order could have been tolerated. "Aye. And the bread, the ovens are good today. The bakers have made enough for the great hall, and there will be 1 loaf for each table in the guards' hall. The oatcakes are drying. I've sent 2 boys to clear the eaves where the snow slides. The last thing we need is a broken skull." "Thank you," Sansa said, and meant it. She moved among the tables and the baskets of onions and the sacks of flour, and the people followed her with their eyes without seeming to look. It was not the gaze of a crowd upon a queen. It was the attention you give to fire, because it warms and because it might burn. At the small table in the corner that used to be the brewer's desk, now pressed into service as an office wherever she went, lay her morning ledger. She set her gloves aside and bent over the columns. The numbers were neat, precise where her hand had grown careful. The sums like a march of men who do not run. Wheat from White Harbor, halved again. Bacon stores, the wax tally. The last of the autumn turnips spoiled by the damp in the cellar under the round tower. She could see in the figures how many had eaten and how quickly they chewed, where the appetites of men emptied pantries faster than the weather filled them, where the days were growing colder and the horses needed more mash. Lady Cautlin set a cup down, steaming. Maester Wolkin said a raven came in the night. He sent for you. Sansa nodded. "I'll see him after I've looked through the lists. Has the steward sent his report?" "Just now," Cautlin said, and handed over another folded sheet, "asking if he is to sell the old axes in the smithy loft for iron to make nails." "Not yet." Sansa marked a note. There was a time we would not have asked about axes. She knew the story of the winter of Bael the Bard as well as she knew the stories of ladies in towers. Stories were a kind of food when you were hungry. Have the carpenter's apprentices set to work on repairing door hinges. There is less waste in the use of iron there. And tell him to resaw the split boards from the granaries. There's use in them yet. When she turned from the ledger, the room seemed noisier. This, too, was a practice, to pull back from detail to the world, to change scale like a hawk climbing on the wind. She straightened, felt the familiar uncomplaining ache in her back from standing too long and sleeping too little, and took the cup to warm her hands. It was the color of old pennies and carried a thin skim of fat on its surface that broke when she breathed across it. The cup smelled like turnip and marrow and a faint ghost of garlic. It tasted like responsibility. "A raven," she said, more to the cup than to Coughlin. "I suppose we'll see if it brings us a candle or a knife." She climbed the steps with the cup in her hand, the heat of it traveling down into her sleeve. On the landing outside the maester's chamber, a little girl with hair the color of chestnuts stood. One hand pressed to the carved wolf on the lintel for balance, her other hand twisted in the hem of her dress. The child's eyes went sideways and sharp when she saw Sansa, like a weasel's for a moment, then became merely a child's again. "Elsbeth," Sansa said, remembering, because remembering names was like keeping promises. "You're on the ravens today?" "Yes, my lady," Elsbeth murmured. "Maester said keep quiet and do not startle them, and do not open the little hatch all the way when it's snowing or they'll think it's summer." "Wise advice," Sansa said. "Do you know what summer looks like?" Elsbeth's face twitched in something like a smile, a quick movement. "Not truly, my lady. Ma says it's a tale, like giants." "It is a true tale," Sansa said. "It will come." She pushed in. Maester Wolkan moved among his birds with the same fussy attention the birds gave the cords and knots and scraps. An old man enclosed by a puzzle he both loved and failed, every day, to solve. He blinked at her, and his head did that bird peck. There was ink on his ring finger and ink on the cuff of his sleeve, and his beard had caught a small feather that he did not seem to know was there. "My lady," he said, "we have had 2 communications of note. One from White Harbor, one from the Fingers." She set her cup down. "Read me the one that is worst for us." He hesitated. "In months when the sea is kind," he said softly, "the one might be the other. White Harbor, then." He lifted the letter from a pile, broke the thin wax, and flattened it on the table with his palm. He cleared his throat, and the old habit of his voice, taught at the Citadel, smoothed by ritual and repetition, gave it a steadiness that his hands had lost. He read in Lord Wyman's hand, which was thick and blunt even in grief. There were ice floes in the harbor early, the fishermen had hauled more empty nets than full ones, men had fallen through, and the last convoy had returned with tales of a thin moon and thinner whales. Yet the Lord Manderley had done as he had promised. He had sent rye and salted cod and 2 barrels of preserved lemons prized by sailors to ward off rot. He had sent 4 men with the convoy who knew the river ways and could read ice by the sound it made. At the end there were words that tried to be courteous and failed. "We expect payment in kind when it can be rendered, and we expect allegiance unquestioned when called upon. The sea is a god with deep pockets." "And the Fingers," Sansa said. Wolkan drew the second letter out like something that might bite. "Lord Yon Royce writes, he keeps his words on short chains, but they are heavy." He began again. House Arryn had its own winters. The young lord had been ill, better, then ill again. He had, with certain misgivings, sent 70 knights to escort a caravan bringing coal and iron, because the north would need iron more than it needed the Vale's goodwill come spring. There were words about the state of the mountain passes and the wastes of the Moon Door and the fragility of alliances. At the end, a single sentence: "We remain bound to you by oath and interest, but do not mistake our patience for duty toward foolishness." Then a mark that could be regarded as a signature. "Bound by oath and interest," Sansa said. "Not by love. Love is dear in winter," Wolkan said. "It huddles by the last fire." Sansa looked out through the narrow window slit. The sky had lifted a little, a lighter gray. A child ran across the yard with his arms outspread, flying. He caught his toe on a rise in the stone and pitched forward, then rolled laughing and lay on his back to let the snow kiss his face. His laughter climbed like a bird in a mild wind, and she felt that ache in her chest that had no useful purpose. "He remembers summer," she said. "Or he invents it." Wolken waited. He had learned her pauses. He had learned the way she turned a thought, how much silence a decision needed. "There is another matter," he said at last. "Not a letter, but a question in the yard." Ser Davos Seaworth arrived an hour ago. "Ser Davos?" Sansa said, and the ache lifted and became something taut and practical, like a drawn bow. "Of course he did. He has not lost his habit of being on time where he is needed most. He asks for you." "He can have 3 hours from me," she said. "That will be a gift I can scarce afford." The old man bowed his head. "Shall I have him brought to your solar, my lady? Save you the walk?" She shook her head. "No. I'll meet him in the Godswood." The Godswood did not know winter the way the rest of the castle knew it. It tolerated winter with an old man's patience and an old woman's disapproval, permitting the cold to lay its hand on the leaves but not to bruise them deeply, allowing the snow to light on the branches of the heart tree and then slide off as if the tree had given a shrug. The pool kept its skin thin near the edge where the underground springs ran, and the pale bark reflected there was a light within the water rather than the sky's paleness above. Sansa had learned that she could think here and that sometimes thought was like kneeling. She was there before Davos and did not have to wait long. Men who had sailed through storms did not waste time searching for paths through snow. He came in with the hood of his cloak down so as not to offend the old gods, and snow had settled on his eyebrows and beard like the salt on his face in other seasons. He looked older, but then so did everyone who had learned to recognize silence and been forced to make a meal of it. "My lady," he said, and bowed as if she were a queen, but also as if he would have bowed that way to any woman offering him bread. Davos Seaworth did not know how to be false even to the point of kindness. "Ser Davos," she said, "you are very welcome." "I wish that were true," he said. "I mean that you are kind to say it, and I mean that I wish I brought you something that would make it true." "Truth is dear in winter, Maester Wolken says," Sansa answered. "You bring truth, at least." He smiled a small, weary smile. "The truth is that I have seen more hungry men than I ever wished to see, and I expect to see more. The truth is that road is ice and dust. The truth is that in the keeps south of here there are no true lords left, only the men who were willing to outwait the last misfortune." "And Jon," Sansa said. Her voice looked for level ground and found it. "And Jon," Davos agreed at once, because the truth is quicker than fear. "He is coming. He asked me to ride before him so that the words I carry could begin working their way through your hall even as he made his way through the snow." "Words are not whetstones," Sansa said. "They do not sharpen themselves." No, Davos moved a step nearer the tree. His eyes flicked to the face carved there and away. "He had words for me. He said to tell you this. He has come to ask the North to remember what it swore when the dead were in the yard and the wind was full of knives. He has come to ask the North to remember that we cannot put lines between fields on a map and expect the weather to respect boundaries. He has come to say that the realm is not a song you sing to yourself. Poetry is an indulgence," Sansa said. She let out a breath and saw it curl in the air. "I could have you arrested for bringing words like those to my yard." "You could," Davos said. "I would not blame you. And if I had you arrested, Jon would come anyway and faster, and jailer and prisoner would be worse off than messenger and lady. Tell me the truth that hurts. Then, he brings a banner, not a basket." "He brings need," Davos said. "He brings a banner because men gather more quickly under one than under a bare branch." She did not want to move and felt the desire to move anyway, the sense of a horse under her hand wanting its head. She took 2 steps and touched the face on the heart tree as if it were a shoulder. "What does he ask?" "He asks what he always asks, my lady. He asks you to believe he is not asking for himself." Sansa laughed, and it startled a bird in the branches above them into flight. It went off like a handful of black thrown against the white. "He does not need to ask me to believe that. I know him. He is the only man I have ever known who can walk into a room and forget there is a throne in it before he has sat down." She turned. "Does he bring ghost?" Davos's mouth twisted. "He does." "Then look to the kennels. Men believe what wolves believe sooner than they believe what letters say. I'll see to it, he said. He eyed her with a practical, tender worry that did not try to hide. I have another truth in my pocket. It is small and sharp. I would give it to you now, because I don't know how many times I'll be allowed into your woods in the days to come. She waited, and the bark under her palm felt like old skin. The men in the south, Davos said, speak your name with fear and respect. They call you Winter's bride and the quiet queen. They say you are made of frost when you want to be. And listen to an old man tell you something you know. They say you are Catelyn's daughter twice over. Winterfell's, Tully's. They say you are the North. And they say Jon is something else. Targaryen, Sansa said, the word tasting like iron she had put into her mouth deliberately. They do not always say the word aloud, Davos said. But they mean it. Do you mean it? I mean that men need a story with a dragon when there are no more dragons. I mean that men want a hearth. I mean that men are tired. I mean that if you two could find your way to one fire and one table, the world would be less cold for a few months. She drew her hand back from the tree and wrapped her arms around herself in a movement so small that if Arya had seen it, she would have mocked her for it, gently or sharply depending on the day. What do you want, Ser Davos Seaworth? Not for the realm, not for Jon. What do you want, save truth? I want to stop that boy in the yard from learning too much too young, he said immediately. I want there to be apples in spring that are not bitter. I want a boat I can mend and use for something other than running away. And I want you to know that Jon will not forgive you for what you may do, but he will not hate you either. She flinched, though his voice had been soft. You speak like the gods would, she said, cold and with roots. I've been in worse places, Davos said. I'll say my piece in the hall when I am asked, and I will not speak where I am not asked. But when Jon comes, the room will tip. You should decide where you want to stand when that happens. When he had gone, the woods breathed out and in again, and Sansa felt the breath inside that breath like the handling of a falcon. The tree's carved eyes looked as they always looked, seeing something that had happened before you were born and would happen after you died. Arya found her there. How she did it was a thing Arya never said outright, the way a cat doesn't explain its paths. She simply arrived and leaned against a birch with her shoulders so loose that you would have thought she'd been asleep if you did not know she never truly slept. There was a nick on her ear that had not been there last week. There was always a new nick, a new slice that would become a small white thread in the cloth of her skin. Davos is here, Arya said. Yes, Sansa answered. He is good. He is weary. I watched from the nearest bit of wall, Arya said cheerfully. Bran says it doesn't matter if I watch. He says he can see everything. Then he does not tell you what he sees, so I watch. That is very like him. Sansa's mouth tightened. He says and he doesn't say. Arya's grin flashed and was gone. You don't like it when people keep secrets. I do not mind secrets, Sansa said calmly. I mind surprises. You and I have different views on the use of surprises, Arya said. Sansa admired the way her sister could make her laugh even when she meant to be firm. I know where I stand with you at Lou. St. She tilted her head. Do you wish to lay a wager, little sister? On what? On how many hours will pass before Jon arrives? No, Arya said, and her mouth did a small harsh twist that was not like her. I don't wager on that. He always comes. Sansa was silent a long moment. Yes, she said at last. He does. They walked back together, Arya half a step ahead and half a step behind at the same time in the way of scouts and wolves. In the yard, a group of boys were making a fort out of snow against the lee of the armory. They had stacked blocks laboriously, each man's height, and were slicing the edges with knives to make them neat. One boy stood at a distance throwing lumps and shouting that he was a king. The boys inside the fort laughed and jeered and rained their own lumps back down to drive him away. They yelled that he could be king of the midden heap for all they cared. Sansa stood a moment and watched, and it seemed to her that all the wars she had learned belonged to little boys and their forts and their shouts, and that the women were the ones who had to mend the knives for the next boys who would shout, and that something about that could be changed if you were brave and cruel and lucky enough. In the great hall she took her seat. The bench had been recarved after the fire, and its edges were still sharp. She had an opinion about the carving of wood and the carving of kingdoms that she did not share yet with anyone. Men came and went, warming themselves but not lingering, because to stay too long in a room like that made you think you had authority there. She let the room fill on its own. It was a way of measuring her own patience that she did not ask anyone to bring her wine. When Davos was brought in, he stood like a man who did not mind being looked at and who did not want to be looked at too much. He inclined his head to the hall and then to her, and not 1 degree lower for kings imagined that were not present. He was led to the place by the pillar near the left-hand fire, where men stood who were respected for what they had done rather than for whose sons they were. He did not speak, and Sansa did not make him speak. She spoke first of the bread and thanked the bakers, and first of the men who had returned from the roads and were not dead from frost, and she called 2 of them by their first names and 2 by their last, so that neither kind of man could think himself overlooked. She spoke of the God's walk maintenance, of the gatehouse hinge, of the lie. She spoke of nothing that mattered yet. She felt the hall's attention draw around the place where Davos stood. It was like watching ice form, a set of lines becoming certain out of the water. At last she said, "Sir Davos Seaworth, you have come too far not to be heard. Tell us what the roads are like. Tell us what song the South is singing." "The South hasn't breath enough left to sing," Davos said. He set his hands at his sides, palms slightly out, as if to show he had nothing in them. "The roads are full of people going someplace they are not wanted. The holds have their doors shut. There are men wearing armor they found on the dead, and men wearing bits of banners sewn to their caps to make themselves look like soldiers. There are old women walking with donkeys with baskets, and there are young men ahead of them with sticks who have told themselves they will fight if they must. There are families who don't look like families anymore. There are wolves in the woods. You can make a meal of most of it with care, wolves, the donkeys, the banners, but you don't want to." Laughter ran through the hall and faltered and sat down again. Davos took a breath and continued. He did not look at Sansa as he said Jon's name. He looked at the floor, as if remembering the old stones in a different hall where he had once stood and watched a different man be praised and then ruined. He told them of Jon's plan in as much as Sansa knew he would tell. That the realm had no use for 12 kings each with 12 laws, that the snows did not thin and thicken because of proclamations, that when men found their way into a room together they sometimes did something like good. When he had finished, there was a kind of murmur that lived briefly in the hall, born of surprise at hearing sense. Sansa closed her hand around the end of the bench until the bones made a small shape beneath her skin. She did not give her answer then. She thanked him, sent for his supper, and sent him to a warm room with strong beer where men would try to question him and he would shrug. She had learned there was power in not answering the first question asked of you. She walked to the solar then and found Bran there in his chair by the fire. He was looking at the flames as if he could read them and find dates and names the way you can in a ledger. His hair had grown past his collar and framed his face in a way that would have made Catelyn anxious and Eddard indifferent. Sansa had learned to let it alone. He blinked when she came in, as if he had been halfway elsewhere and the hinge had squeaked as he came back. "You are not here," she said, taking the seat opposite him. "I am here," he said. "I am also elsewhere." "You are impossible," she said without heat. "Do you know why I sent Davos to the Godswood? Because there is a place where men are less likely to lie to you when there is a face watching," Bran said. "And because wolves remember better in the snow." "Did you pay attention to what he said?" "I pay attention to everything," Bran said, and his face did something odd that might have been irony and might have been pain. "That is what I do now, whether I mean to or not. Jon is coming." "Yes." She waited. The fire snapped. She sipped at the cup someone had left near Bran and found it to be the thin wine the maester mixed with dried brambleberries. "I said it, and you do not answer as if it matters." "It matters," he said. "It matters to you, and it matters to Arya, and it matters to the men who will be asked to stand in a circle and shout. It matters to Ghost. It matters to some people you have never seen. But the snow will fall either way." She closed her eyes briefly. "I have to decide whether to put him in a room and lock the door. His eyes moved from the fire to her face. He looked at her as if she were a tree he could climb if he needed to, and also as if he did not particularly want to. I know. Will you tell me if I am wrong? He tilted his head. Do you think I know the difference between wrong and right? Bran, I know outcomes, he said simply. I know fragments of what may. If I tell you the outcomes, you will choose differently, and then I will have told you something else entirely. If I tell you nothing, you will choose as Sansa does. If I tell you everything, you will not be Sansa anymore. She set the cup down so carefully that it made no sound at all on the table. Then tell me this. Do I betray him and keep our people? Or do I trust him and lose them? He looked like a boy suddenly. It broke her heart in that way certain small truths will do. The way a notch in your favorite spoon hurts your thumb every time. What if there is a way where you betray him and keep him anyway? He asked. He did not say more. He turned his gaze back to the fire. Either he could not say more or he thought he had said enough. Sansa sat and watched the blood in her own hand pulse. She knew that kind of way. It was on the thin edge where kindness leaned toward cruelty and truth leaned toward tool, and where you walked with your eyes half closed because you could not bear to look full at what you were. Arya came later and threw herself on the settle in the manner she had when she was little, an untidy collapse that took up more space than it should. You are not eating enough, Arya said by way of concern. You look like a stick with a ribbon tied near the top. I eat, Sansa said. I make certain everyone eats. You make certain everyone eats before you, Arya said. That is different. Sansa let that pass. He will be here before full dark tomorrow, she said. We must make certain the gates are prepared. We must make certain the men are where they ought to be. We must make certain that Ser Davos cannot go from room to room and speak to whomever he is inclined to persuade. You mean, Arya said, teasing. We must make certain he cannot talk sense into anyone. I mean, we must make certain that people think before they are warmed by an old man's eyes. She looked down at her hands. I will have Jon shown to the room in the Round Tower. Arya rolled and sat up. Her eyes had gone flat and bright, like a knife held to the light. The Round Tower? Yes. She made herself say the rest. There is a bolt on the outside of the door, Arya. There always has been. I know, Arya said. She stood. She walked to the fireplace and put her hands up in front of it as if she could warm herself from fingers to shoulders. Do you want me to be the one who turns it? No, Sansa said at once, her throat closing. No, Arya nodded. Good. She was quiet a long time. Then she said, conversational, the way one speaks when the conversation is far harder than the tone would admit. He will forgive you, you know. He always forgives us. That is why I am afraid. When the dawn came thin and reluctant, the yard was alive early, as if the men had conspired with the sun to be present at trouble from the first minute. Riders moved like punctuation along the wall if you looked from a distance, and like individual men with faces and habits if you stood at the gate. Sentries swapped places with the men who had stood the night, and you could tell the latter by their silence and the way their knees twitched as if they were still persuading themselves to stand. The air was clear with a cold that reduced everything to exactly itself. The smell of wet leather, the jangling of a bit, the crunch of new snow under boots. The black banner with the white direwolf hung flat on the pole, heavy with ice. Sansa wore a plain cloak of gray with a fur collar, and her hair was braided like a tethered river down her back. She would have dressed no other way for this. There was a time when she would have thought of what dress would make him feel warmer toward her, what shade would flatter her skin, what small token in her hair would remind him of the sister he had guarded on long-ago walks where their footsteps made different sounds on the path. She was not that girl. She had been that girl and survived her. Bran and Arya flanked her a pace back, because this was how they did things now, like a coin with three faces. Men looked at them and saw what they needed to see. They saw the North. They saw the wolves. They saw a family that had been broken and remade, the way you remake a sword that has been shattered. Not quite the same temper, not quite the same edge. Stronger in some places, brittle in others. They saw what they wanted to see, that you could come home. From the gatehouse there came the cry, and you could feel the hall take a breath even here in the yard. The men who had served Eddard would not have named it a breath, but that was what it was. It was the same breath taken by men at the beginning of battle and by women at the beginning of birth. The gates creaked. A fan of snow fell from the top of the left-hand leaf where the iron had warmed by a degree and let go its white burden. Then the wedge of men came through, riders at their head and walkers behind, and wolves do not need banners when they have wolves. Ghost was as white as everything else and therefore somehow whiter. His shoulder as high as Sansa's breast. His eyes the only color in the world for a moment. He moved ahead, pausing, alerting, looking back. Behind him, Jon. He rode without the arrogance of warriors who forget they are men because they sit a horse well. He rode like a man-yo. You might ask to carry a sack the last 100 yards up a hill because you trusted that he would. His face looked reduced to what it had always been, as winter reduces food to its taste. There was kindness in it and weariness and a steadiness that made you want to lean. He dismounted lightly despite the ride and held the rein with a habit he was no longer aware of to keep the horse from nosing at Ghost. He looked at Sansa and did not smile. The lack of it was a kind of courtesy. It told her he had not expected welcome where welcome could not be given. He stepped forward and bowed to the degree that was respect without submission. She stepped forward and offered him her hand, and he took it and did not let it go too long. Their fingers knew each other entirely and not at all. "Jon," she said, and felt the roomful of men listening to her say his name. "Welcome to Winterfell." "Thank you, my lady," he said. His voice had been rubbed by miles and cold. It sounded like a rope pulled over a rough post. He turned then and did a small thing that told the yard as much as his words would do later. He put his hand on Ghost's neck and the wolf leaned into it. Men who had never seen the two together straightened. There are friendships that bend the world a little toward rightness. Ghost's breath plumed and his ear flicked, and he looked at Sansa for a beat longer than a wolf should look at a woman, as if agreeing to something she had not said yet. "Come," Sansa said. "You must eat before the hall eats you." It was arranged beforehand and looked like accident. There was a warm room set not far from the great hearth where he might wash and set his cloak and leave his sword, and where one man would stand not quite at the door and another in the corridor. There was a place in the hall where he would sit that was not next to her and not far enough to be insult, where he would not be able to lean over and speak to too many men at once. There was the round tower room that had always smelled of apples and dust and that now smelled of apples and dust and iron. Sansa had told herself too many times the old story of the bolt on the outside of the door, had told herself until it had become something more like a prayer. She told herself again now, "I will bolt it if I must. I will keep him if the keeping is for the good of what he loves." She found she could not eat much. Her mouth had the feel of wood, the way it does when a speech has been boiled in it for too long. Jon ate the way soldiers eat when they are careful not to look hungry. He drank the beer with a small grimace because beer had never been his friend and wine had not always been, and she loved him for that small grimace. It was a shard of the boy in him. Davos sat with the men by the pillar and did not look toward Jon too often, and Arya went to him and dropped words in his ear and made him huff into his cup. The lords of the north pretended not to be measuring each other, and the men of the Manderley levy pretended not to be impressed by Ghost, and no one looked at Bran for too long because the air felt thinner near him. At last the talk turned in the direction it had always been going to turn. The men looked at Jon as if he were a road sign and then looked at Sansa as if she were the thing the sign pointed to and then looked back at Jon again. This is how it is with family in the north, Sansa thought. We are the hills the clouds hang on to as they pass. Jon stood without banging his knee on the bench. He did not ask for silence. The hall made it for him. He did not raise his cup. He did not lift a banner. He did not do any of the things men think they must do when they want to be listened to. He simply said, "When you are far from home and you are hungry, and you walk and walk, you will come to a place where there is a door. You will knock on it whether it is yours or not. You will hope someone is listening on the other side. I hope you are listening now." He told them about roads again, but in a way different from Davos because Jon did not see roads as lines between places. He saw them as strings connecting people like children's fingers in a game. He told them about men with wooden swords teaching boys how not to die immediately with a real one. He told them about women who had nothing left to sell but the piece of silver their mother had hidden in the hem of her robe, and how they bought half a loaf with it and fed their children the half that was mostly crust. He told them about a keep where the Lord had shut his gates because he was an honest man, and honesty gets cold if you let too much air in. He told them about nights where the frost made the boards creak under your body as if something was walking there, and mornings when the world had climbed into a glimmer that could break your heart. He told them, because he could not help himself, about a man who had handed him a cup of hot milk beside a ditch and never asked his name. He said the man's name if he knew it and described his face if he did not. He did not speak of kings. He did not speak of thrones. He did not speak of dragons or of the old gods or new ones. He did not speak of himself at all. When he had finished, the silence was not the same silence they had given him at the beginning. It was denser, like wool, and you could have made a coat out of it if you knew how. Sansa felt her heart beat like a thing that was trying to find the door. She stood. Winterfell hears, she said. Winterfell remembers. Winterfell decides. She met his eyes across the room and knew that she could not stand there long. She left the hall then with something that looked like peace and felt like pain. In the corridor she stopped and put her hand to the wall and took the strength of the castle through her palm. The stone was cool and unyielding, and it had not often yielded to the wishes of Starks before her. She closed her eyes and saw the bolt on the outside of the door. She found herself in the room that had once been her mother's and was now hers in a way that Catelyn would have approved. Tidy, useful, devoid of indulgence except where remembrance could be counted as a generosity to the dead. The small chest by the window held the letters she had not burned. The winter light came across the floor in a crooked rectangle. She sat down on the settle and began to draft the words that she would put in men's mouths. She did not deceive herself. This was what ruling often came down to, composing arguments in different voices that other people would find their way to sincerely. She wrote a little in Lord Glover's blunt cant, a paragraph in Lady Mormont's spirit that would have made her laugh if the girl had still been there to laugh. She wrote in Yohn Royce's shape and in Wyman Manderley's. She wrote out the old vow and wrote a new vow beside it that promised the same thing with different edges. She wrote and crossed out, until the fire burned low and she realized she was freezing. She called for more wood. The boy who came with it was so young as to have down still at the curve of his jaw. He looked like someone's brother. He was, "My lady," he said breathless from the stairs. "Thank you," she said. "Set it there, and tell me your name." "Burren, my lady," he said, and flushed as if he had gambled and won. "Burren," she repeated. "Where is your brother?" "In the stables," he said, surprised. "How did you know?" "You look like him," she said. "Go on." When he was gone, she stared at the door a long time and thought of another boy and his brother and the way a woman had stood at a window and watched the door where they would come through and had not known that the door would open on death. She shook herself like a dog shaking itself back into the day and went to the Godswood again, because the Godswood had become the only place where she could decide anything without hating herself for deciding it. The tree did not shift when she told it. "I will do it. I will put him in the round tower and I will turn the bolt. I will feed him there and I will speak to him through the door. I will do it with love and I will do it with coldness. I will do it for the north." If there was an answer, it was only the sound of snow-bowing branches. She slept little and dreamt poorly. In the morning she went about her tasks with a clear head and hands that did what she asked them do. She met with the steward and agreed to the sale of the axes now that she had done what she could with the door hinges. She sent a message to the blacksmith with a small drawing of a nail for a particular purpose and told him to find the right brine for cooling. She walked the inner curtain and felt the tremble of men's fear through the soles of her boots and thought, "Better when the fear is yours than when it is a stranger's." She spoke 5 words to Arya that held 20 more inside them like a purse that jingled. "Be ready. Be careful. Not yet." She spoke none to Bran, and he watched her and said as she turned to go, "You have always been good at winter, because I learned the summer first," she said without stopping. When evening came again, the light cut itself on the edges of the ice and scattered. The hall lit in a long, slow flare, candles finding themselves lit by other candles in a chain of small golds. Sansa took her place and Jon took his, and Arya's mouth tilted and Davos stared down into his cup and thought of other halls. The meat was lean and the bread was dense. The talk wore itself a path as talk will toward the thing. When enough men had said enough that it would not be seen as her imposition, Sansa stood. "We will call a council," she said. "We will sit in the old way with no dais, with no banners save the wolf. We will ask men to speak as men of the north, not as men of a house. We will hear the reasons for what we should do. We will not decide by acclamation or by noise. We will decide by counting heads, as if we were counting the winter stores. We will count, and we will say, and we will keep to what we have said." Wise, Davos muttered into his beer. For this was something men could do without having to promise forever. She let the murmur settle and then said, "Tomorrow at noon, the yard. Wear your cloaks." They filed out then into the cold, and the talk bubbled like a creek under ice and made shapes plausible and otherwise. Sansa walked beside Jon a little way, the space between them like a third person. He did not try to fill it. She was grateful for that. "Your counsel will be a good one," he said. "It will let the words breathe a little. You have learned well." "I learned here," she said. "There is no other place where things stick to you so." "Did you know?" he said, with a small awkwardness that reminded her of something long ago and cut her like a tiny knife. "When we were children, I used to think the snow in this yard fell in a different way from the snow in the woods. It seemed gentler." She watched the steam from his breath and thought stupidly that steam should have a color of its own, perhaps the color of the person it had left. "It is not gentle," she said. "It just falls where there are more eyes to see it." He nodded. They walked a few more steps. She stopped where the path veered toward the round tower. "Jon," she said, as if she were saying farewell for a day, as if in a day you could forgive anything. "You are weary. Let me put you to rest." He smiled then, finally, and the sight of it made her heart thump against the bars she had set around it. "You always were kind," he said, and then corrected himself. "You learned to be kind in the right way." She led him up the tower stairs. The walls were close, and the air smelled of the dried apples still on the racks and of dust warm from the afternoon sun, as if the room remembered heat even now. The chamber itself was modest and honest, with a narrow bed and a table and a chair and a small hearth. Of food waited on the table though he had eaten. There was always a platter of food waiting, a jug of beer, pot of thick tea. The iron bolt on the outside of the door was new and old both. The cleats had been fashioned long ago by men who had counted iron dear, and the bolt itself by men who had had iron to waste and wasted it wisely. She stood in the doorway. He stepped in and set his gloves on the table and touched the back of the chair as if to steady it. Ghost paced the room once and sniffed the hearth and lay down across the threshold with a sigh, as if he were sealing something, as if he felt the wind coming and would have none of it. "Sleep," Sansa said. She wanted, in that instant, to say his name again and again until it became something that would bind his hands to his sides and keep him from climbing out of himself. She said instead, "Good night." "Good night," Jon said. She closed the door. She set her hand against the wood and felt its grain as if it were skin. She slid the bolt. There was the faintest sound from within, the shuffle that people make when they realize a door has done something they did not expect. Then nothing. Then Ghost rose and came to the inside of the door and leaned his weight against it, and she had to put her shoulder to her side of it lightly, for balance, as if she were dancing with the wolf through the inch-thick wood. She stood that way for a long time, the two of them in a stubborn, gentle contest. At last Ghost gave way and withdrew. She could feel him settle again. When she went down the stairs, her legs shook, and she took it for what it was, the tremor of a woman who had done something she could not take back, and had done it with both hands open. She slept that night because her body demanded it, not because it was given to her. In the morning, she did not go first to the round tower. She went to the yard and saw that the benches were being carried into place and the space for speech marked out with ash on the snow. She went to the kitchen and tasted the barley and found it wanting and sent for salt and the last of the onion and felt Bennett's eyes on her like a seamstress's pins. She went to the wall and looked out and saw the long white world come to an end where the sky began. She did not let herself count the hours. When she went at last, Arya came with her but did not offer to go up the stairs. She leaned against the wall at the base of the tower and did something complicated with the little knife she was not supposed to be playing with in sight of anyone. The men who passed by looked away quickly so as not to embarrass themselves with their fear. Sansa took the steps deliberately. She fitted the key into the new iron lock she had set a foot above the bolt because iron lies better when it is doubled. She slid the bolt back and turned the key and opened the door and felt the air out of the room hello her face. Jon stood by the window. He had not slept or had slept and risen. He had not eaten or had eaten and was made of habit rather than hunger. He did not turn when the door opened. He had understood something about her and about the way of things, and he was giving her the chance to speak first. Ghost stood by him, the two of them bracketed in that narrow north light like a pairing out of a story. "I am sorry," Sansa said. The words were not the ones she had planned. They were naked and unarmed. "I locked the door." "I know," Jon said. She took a breath and tasted iron. "I intend to keep you here until the council has met. I intend to keep you here until the men have said what men will say. I intend to keep you here until the North has chosen what it will be. I will not have them look at you while they are deciding. I will not have their love become the pit that everything falls into." He turned then, and his face was only his face. He looked so much like their father when he did that, like the part of their father that had looked at a chopping block without blinking, that she felt the yard under her shift. He came closer, not too close. "You have done harder things than this," he said quietly. "I have done worse things than this," she said. "I have done things that have no name." He nodded. "Will you sit and talk with me? Or will you put the bolt back now and wait outside like a jailer counting down the hours?" She went in. She closed the door but did not bolt it. Ghost looked at both of them and lay down again as if to remind them that many stupid things happened indoors, as if he mistrusted walls in general. Sansa sat at the small table like a woman in a story who had gone into a room where a man spun straw into gold and needed to know the name of the thing he had made. "You had a father," Jon said, and the not-quite smile came and went on his mouth, "who would have cut this bolt for you himself if you had told him it was necessary and had hung it for you and would have hated himself every time he looked at it." "Yes," Sansa said, and she did not cry because she had done all that too long ago. "I have him every day. I have him when I do things I hate." "You intend to claim the throne for the North," Jon said. He did not make it a question. "You intend to do it and you intend to keep it. You intend to make the Lord say the word queen and mean it." "Yes." "Do you intend to kill me to do it?" She closed her eyes. "No. The only men I intend to kill are the ones who will need killing. And if I were to stand up in your yard and say something that would make your men love me again in a way that would make them useless to you, then I would have you stand up in the yard," she said calmly. "And I would have you say it after they had already loved me enough to be useful." He looked down at his hands. They had scars in them. The new ones were faint, the old ones were pale and polished like old bone, smooth with use. He set them on the table palm up, as if offering to be read. She did not take them. "I will not stand against you," he said. "I will not stand against the North. I am tired of standing against things that should not need standing against. I came to ask you to stand together. You have locked me in a room so that I cannot bend minds that are not yet bent. I understand it. You hate me," she said dully and heard Davos's voice. "He will not hate you either." "No," Jon said. "I do not hate you." He looked at her steadily. "I love you, and I do not forgive you. Not yet." She bowed her head because a queen can do that if she is careful with the gesture. "That will have to be enough." He almost smiled again. It did not quite come. "It has to be." They sat a while in a silence that did not make either of them wish to talk. At last she rose. "There is an hour yet before the council," she said. "I will send food." "I have enough," he answered. He glanced at the plate she had brought the night before and at the way the bread had hardened and the cheese sweated. "I will not starve in 1 hour." She stood with her hand on the bolt, and this time she knew what the touch meant. It was a pledge and a threat both. "If I had not done this," she said to the wood and to him and to herself, "I could not have stood in front of men and asked them things." "I know," he said gently, and she wanted to hit him, For gentleness is a weapon when you are in the wrong. She slid the bolt. She went down the stairs. Arya lifted her eyes to hers and asked nothing, because asking is a kind of cruelty when the answer is locked in a room. The yard filled again. The benches creaked under men's weight, and the ash lines had melted and been retraced, and it felt like a place where two winters met. One human, one sky. Sansa took her place in the circle. There was no chair for her. She would not sit while the men stood. She had decided that and meant it. Davos came to stand at the outer ring and kept his hand in his cloak and watched faces the way he had learned to watch seas. Bran was there, and he was everywhere, and Arya did the thing she did with her chin that meant she was prepared to be the wrong kind of problem if the right kind did not present itself. Sansa spoke first, not because she was queen already but because she always made the first cut. She gave them the numbers. How many sacks of barley, how many men sick with the lung fever, how many wolves sighted near the southern road. She gave them the names, of the houses that had answered, of the small holds that had sent in late tithes and the ones that had not. Then she spoke the thing that would be said whether she spoke it or not. The South will ask us to bend again. Jon Royce spoke then, his deep voice as crisp as iron in winter. The Vale can give you 20 score men for the passes if it is to the benefit of both. It will always be to the benefit of the Vale not to have bodies rotting in the mountain ways. We will not feed a queen who cannot hold her line. Nor will we starve under a king who cannot find his way to a roof, Lord Glover said gruffly. But the boy is right too. The roads do not respect your titles. The North, Lady Alice Karstark said, has been a graveyard for the South's ideas for longer than you or I have been alive. Wyman Manderley's man, for Wyman was too fat now to travel and too proud to be seen to be trying, spoke in that rolling way that made men think of ships. White Harbor will send goods, he said carefully, and men and ships where they can. But White Harbor will not send those things into a space where dragons burned once because a story asked them to. Davos cleared his throat and said softly without their leave, "There are no dragons. Then there will be other stories," Manderley's man said. "And the North shall be one of them," Sansa said, and the cold took the words and set them in the air to see how they looked. The North shall be what it was and something else besides. The North shall be the place where we do not surrender our children to rooms that have bolts on the outside of their doors. A murmur. Some men looked at her and saw the door she had slid the bolt on. She let them see it. A few understood what she had admitted and respected it. A few were frightened. Many were simply moved because the sentence had the shape of a thing that men like to live in. "We must choose," she said. "We must choose the thing that will let us wake up in the morning and not vomit. We must choose the thing that will let us bury a child if we must without lying to ourselves about why he is dead. We must choose the thing that does not require us to become like men we have hated." She turned then and lifted her hand. Men made a path without knowing why. There was the corridor, there was the stair. She climbed it again with all those eyes on her back. She heard, as if it were the creaking of an old boat, the motion of a pinion behind her. She slid the bolt. She opened the door. Jon came out with Ghost beside him, and it was as if the room had held him only in courtesy. He did not look surprised, and he did not look grateful. He took his place opposite her in the circle and nodded to men whose names he remembered because he could not bear to forget them. She said, loud enough and without flourish, "My brother was kept this morning so that we might think clearly. I will not keep him another hour. He will speak, and then we will decide." Jon looked at her a moment that contained 100 winters, and then he spoke as if the snow were listening too. He told them what he had told them and what they had never heard from this mouth before. That he was not their king, that he was not any man's king, that he was of the North in a way only a bastard can be of a house, and he was of something else in a way only a man who has died and lived can be of a thing. He did not say dragon. He did not say Targaryen. He did not say queen. He said Sansa. "Sansa," he said, "has kept you through a winter. She will keep you through more. She will. Do it where you can see her, where you can count the things she has done. She will do it without asking you to make pretend about your souls. She will not be cruel when kindness will do, and she will not be kind when cruelty is all there is. She is a Stark. She is Winterfell. If you need a word to shout because shouting gives you heart, shout queen. But remember that you are shouting a woman's name. He stepped back then, and Sansa felt the word move through the men like heat under a door. Some yelled at once because yelling felt good. Some waited because waiting had kept them alive. Arya did not shout. She stood with her hands in her sleeves and let her eyes eat the faces of men who had not decided yet. Davos did not shout. He smiled and shook his head at the way men are. Bran did not shout. He watched and was elsewhere. He watched the moment fold into the others that had made this one. There was no crown. There was only a word and a nod, another word and another. Sansa stood with her hands at her sides and did not let her mouth do anything but be. The term flowed and receded. The edges wavered. Men spoke of White Harbor, of the Vale, of the Fingers' sour stone, of the river that had not frozen yet and should have. The shout became a vote because she had told them it would. Hands were raised. A tally was kept with notches on a stick. The stick looked like any other stick. When it was done, it was not done. Nothing is. It was merely more done than it had been. They came to her in twos and threes then, the men who had wanted to make this their doing. Glover with his brows like black wings, Manderly's man with the smell of salt in the seams of his cloak, Royce with his patient iron. They spoke their oaths and said the words that old men have said in rooms like this since the world put roofs over people. She took their hands and gave them back and did not give any of the little speeches she had written. She did not need them now. After a time she found she needed to go back to the God's Walk and remind the tree that it had not been alone. She went, and the snow was lighter now and blew sideways, and the world had gone gray behind gray in the way it does before evening truly comes. She set her fingers in the groove of the heart tree's bark where she had set them before, and this time she did not speak. She leaned. She stood that way long enough to feel the ache in her shoulders become something like certainty. She breathed. Footsteps came. She did not turn. Jon came to stand beside her and did not touch the tree. He had never cared for old gods much, and the tree had never cared much for men who did not care for it. They stood like that, their shoulders neighbors, until she said, "I did it." "You did," he said. "You did it. And you did it in a way that did not make the men who had to learn it feel small." "I locked you in," she said, because it was a thing that had to be said twice at least or it would stay unsaid. "You did," he said. "You did it with love and with coldness." "I named the coldness love," she said bitterly. "That is often what it is," he said. "There are men who cut off a boy's hand to keep him from dying of a fever that would have killed him anyway. They do it, and then they burn the stump to stop the bleeding, and they say they are sorry, and afterward they never sleep. That is love. And it is cold." He glanced sideways at her. "Do you think I did not learn that here, with Father, with the Night's Watch, with all the rest? Do you think I do not know what it is to be the boy?" she said. They stood there long enough that the light went from careful to careless. Arya found them eventually, or perhaps the gods would grew them under her eye. With Arya you could not tell, and there was no use asking. She came and stood on Sansa's other side and said cheerfully, "Well, sister, you're a story now." "That is what men want in winter," Sansa said. "Something to tell after they've eaten. And something to make them eat," Arya said, nudging her with her shoulder. "When you are a story, you become an appetite." Bran rolled into the edge of the wood with his chair pushed by a boy who stood sweating though the air had gone knife blade sharp. He settled where he could see the tree and them and the sky all at once. "It is begun," he said. He said it in a way that made it sound like something out of the leaves. "What is begun?" Arya said in a sing-song meant to mock the tone but not the boy. "Whatever comes next," Bran said. Sansa lifted her face to the sky. The flakes hesitated again as if thinking. She wondered how many times she would have to stand in this place and do things that made the men in the hall think she was frost made flesh. She wondered and did not fear it more than she feared the other thing. The thing where she did not stand at all. She slept that night with the bolt of another door in her dream, a bolt she could not quite see the shape of, which she had to slide to let something out rather than to keep something in. She woke with the taste of iron in her mouth and did not tell anyone. The days that followed had the steadiness of a story told without haste. Ravens out, ravens in. Men on the wall, women at the long tables, knives sharpened, the small unexpected joys that make a winter possible. A pot of honey found at the back of a shelf not yet gone to sugar, a pair of boots that fit a boy for once at the right time, a morning when the ice at the edge of the pool in the gods would made music when you tapped it. Davos walked the walls and did not offer counsel unless asked, and when he did he offered it like a man offering a cup, on the flat of his hands, not to be taken if you did not want it. Arya went and came and men were learning to nod to her as they would to weather. Bran watched and somewhere a crow shook its feathers. Ghost took patrols of his own. Men spoke of the queen and meant Sansa and spoke of the north and meant their children. The south would send letters. The Vale would send men. The river would try to freeze and fail and try again. The bolt on the round tower would come out of Sansa's hand sometimes in sleep, and sometimes she would wake and find that she had set it again in the dark. Toward the end of the week, when the sun had given up pretending to be anything but a low pale wound in the sky, Davos came quietly to her and said, "There is a man in the yard wants to speak to you. He says he has been away and home is not where he left it." "Many men can say that," Sansa said. "Who is he?" Davos's mouth tugged. "He has a face that looks like a river. It changes while you watch." She smiled despite herself. "Bring him to the small hall." He came wearing a cloak that had been a better cloak once and had once been worn by a better man. You could tell both by the way it fell heavily and by the way it had been mended along one edge with care. He took the hood down and the faces of half a dozen men wept through her mind at once like water over stones. Faces from King's Landing and from beyond the Trident and from the Vale. He bowed as if he respected rooms and not the people in them, and when he straightened his eyes were polite and old and very alive. "Tyrion," she said. "My lady," he said. "Your grace, do they say, when they are not within your hearing. I thought I should not test the words on you until I had found out whether they were dangerous." "All words are dangerous," she said. She looked past him to the shadow near the door where she knew another presence hovered and said, "You might as well come out. We are done with boys at doors." The shadow moved and there was the shape of a woman whose hair had once been redder and whose mouth had once been willing to smile more and whose eyes were the same. Sansa felt something in her go both tight and loose at once, like a fist unclenching a little and reaching for a knife at the same time. "Lady Brienne," she said. "My lady," Brienne said. "Your grace." She said the word without flattery and without solemnity, which made it feel like a nail hammered in straight. "You have come a long way," Sansa said, and the undermeaning of it moved under the table like a slow fish. "We have," Tyrion said. He took the seat she pointed to and did not touch the wine that was set near his hand. "No dragons, no kings, only winter." "Only winter," Sansa agreed. "And the north." "And the north," Tyrion said, and smiled as if he had found himself at last in a story where he knew his part, or would know it if he read very carefully. "I have news, and I have a proposal that will sit ill with you for a very long time and may, nevertheless, make it possible for the men in your yard to become old without becoming ghosts on the way." "Then tell me both," Sansa said, and folded her hands together on the table the way her mother once had. "And understand that I am the North." "I would not have come otherwise," Tyrion said. He leaned forward slightly and the light from the fire made a ladder across his face. "Your Grace," he said, "there is to be a council in the south." "Of course there is," Sansa said. "Men love councils. They believe the world will be better if they find the right table." "This table," Tyrion said dryly, "will be very large. It will require more than men who like to hear their own voices. It will require something else entirely. It will require you." Brienne's eyes flicked to Sansa's hands, then to her face. Arya, who had been standing unseen in the corner long enough to hear the last 3 sentences without showing herself, rolled her shoulders like a hunter seeing the deer turn its head. Bran, elsewhere, found himself in the hall and in a tree and watching the flight of a bird over a camp where men were gathering. Sansa felt the bolt in her hand again, the smooth iron, the weight. She thought of doors and tables and rooms where girls learn to smile at men who cannot be trusted to understand kindness. She thought of Jon, standing in a circle full of men who had decided to shout. She thought of the honey they had found and the boy with the down on his chin and the apple smell in the round tower. She thought of the sea and the men whose job it was to read it. "Tell me everything," she said, and Tyrion did. And the story began to turn in the way stories do when winter is present, slowly and all at once, with patience, with great care, with names like knives and promises like bread, with small kindnesses and small cruelties and a great, cold love that is larger than any room can hold.